The magnitude of allegations against P. Diddy just grew tenfold, as more than 100 survivors are now coming forward with even more accusations against the disgraced musician. And for the first time, we're hearing from Tony Buzbee, the attorney bringing these 120 new lawsuits against Diddy in a one-on-one interview. He says these suits will bring brand new, shocking revelations, including Diddy's alleged sexual assault of a 9-year-old child, and on a separate occasion, the assault of a pregnant woman. But that's not all. The lawsuits will apparently divulge some high-profile celebrity names that will shock us. I'm Gillespie, and this is Law&Crime News. The hits just keep on coming against 54-year-old Sean Diddy Combs, whose fall from grace has now reached new levels. Just last week, we were reporting on the 12 civil suits filed against Diddy, and now 120 more suits are set to be filed against him in the next 30 days. All of this comes as Diddy himself is behind bars at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, having been denied bail twice. Diddy's in jail now awaiting trial on the federal charges of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. This after a federal grand jury indicted him nearly a year after we first heard rumblings about Diddy's alleged illegal activity. We really have to credit Cassandra Ventura, also known as the singer Cassie, for getting the ball rolling in the case against Diddy. She began working in the music industry with Diddy when she was just 19 years old, and she says almost right away, Diddy began asserting control over her. The pair dated for years, and Cassie says during this time, Diddy was emotionally, physically, and sexually abusive. Cassie's lawsuit was where we first heard the term freak-off. She says it started when Mr. Combs hired a man and brought the man to his home in Los Angeles. The man, Mr. Combs, and Miss Ventura wore masquerade masks and ingested drugs. Mr. Combs directed Miss Ventura to perform sexual acts with this man while Mr. Combs watched them. He masturbated while directing Miss Ventura and the man to do specific sexual acts. Mr. Combs began to call the arrangement a freak-off or FO. He would repeatedly tell Miss Ventura at random moments that he wanted an FO, and Miss Ventura was eventually expected to facilitate the location and the hiring of male sex workers. This is all laid out in Cassie's lawsuit that was filed last November. It was settled just one day after it was filed, but the damage was done. Multiple other survivors came forward over the next several months, all accusing Diddy of sexual assault. And the pattern laid out in these lawsuits was eerily similar. Diddy would drug or force these victims to consume alcohol that was oftentimes laced. After that, he would sexually assault them, sometimes as part of these freak-offs. On multiple occasions, Diddy would apparently record these sessions and then use them as blackmail to keep the victims quiet. It's ironic then that these same recordings are now being used in the federal case against Diddy. His indictment explains this, saying that when federal investigators raided 2 of Diddy's homes in March 2024, they collected digital evidence to be used in the case. If you're out and about while you're watching our video, listen up. This one is for you. I'm talking about the free app Upside that gets you cash back on daily essentials. It's something I use every time I pump my gas because it's so easy and it's free, so why not? Okay, here's what you do. You just download the Upside app and then you claim an offer for whatever you're buying. You pay as usual and then just follow the steps on the app to get paid. To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on the screen and use our promo code LCNews to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. The indictment also specifically references freak-offs, calling them elaborate and produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, masturbated during, and often electronically recorded. Federal court documents reference just one survivor in the case, labeled as Victim 1. We can't 100% confirm who that is, but an educated guess is that it's Cassie. We also can't confirm that Cassie testified in front of a grand jury that indicted Diddy, but we can confirm she was speaking with the feds before his arrest. And now it's possible that even more survivors will be speaking with the feds, and the amount of cases they're bringing forward is overwhelming. On Tuesday, Houston-based attorney Tony Buzbee announced 120 new civil lawsuits against P. Diddy that are expected to be filed over the next 30 days. Buzbee explained 60 of the survivors are women and the other 60 men. Of them, 25 alleged they were sexually assaulted as minors. More than half of these survivors already spoke out about the abuse, reporting it to the police or to hospitals. But now they're telling their stories to the world in the way of 120 separate civil lawsuits. As Buzbee explained, this is not a class action lawsuit, but rather each survivor will file suit against Diddy separately in the state where the incident occurred. And Buzbee said these assaults took place in Los Angeles, Miami, and New York. They date as far back as 1991. He says these lawsuits will describe multiple new allegations, including violent sexual assault or rape, sexual abuse, facilitating sex with controlled substances, false imprisonment, compelling prostitution, sexual misconduct, dissemination of video recordings, and sexual abuse of minors. And it's not just Diddy that's being called out in these suits. Buzbee says other high-profile celebrities were involved in these alleged assaults, specifically saying the names will shock you. From here, we have to dig a bit deeper. We're joined now by Tony Buzbee, who's the attorney representing a slew of these civil plaintiffs against Diddy. Tony, thank you so much for coming on with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with the big question, why now? I mean, Diddy was indicted last month, but these allegations came out almost a year ago, starting in November of last year with Cassandra Ventura. So why now are these plaintiffs planning to file suit?
I think it's because the indictment and then the denial of bail. We had several cases before the indictment, and we were just kind of waiting to see what the federal government was going to do. We knew there was an investigation ongoing. Then when the indictment came about, and then when the um, the arrest occurred, and then when bail was denied, I think those events led to more and more calls. And then my co-counsel, who then called me and associated me with the case, and thought that this would probably be the kind of case that I should handle. When I made an announcement that I was going to pursue these cases, the floodgates really opened. We, in about 10-day period, we got 3,200 calls, and then from the press conference we had yesterday, we've had 12,000 calls since, and I guess in about what 24 hours. And so our Herculean task is to try to sift through every one of these calls and make sure that we are identifying those who are victims and those who are witnesses and collect evidence. I mean, we have about almost 100 people working on this task. The 120 that we announced yesterday, those are claims that we could file right now against Sean Combs, but we're trying to make sure that when we file the cases, and they're going to be filed on an individual basis, that we include every potentially liable party. And but by that I mean any entities or other individuals that either were involved, participated, facilitated, egged it on, provided the venue, benefited from it, profited from it, that sort of thing. So that's where we are now. We have 120 cases that we are preparing to file, and we're trying to sift through another 12,000 phone calls and contacts that we've received in the last 24 hours. So, the volume of calls has been overwhelming, and it's been kind of shocking. But when you put it in context that we're talking about alleged behavior that occurred over 25 years with individuals that had parties. I mean, you can only imagine the amount of different types of parties that occurred. We're talking about album release parties. We're talking about the white parties you've heard about, after parties, after shows, just impromptu parties at hotels and clubs. I think the indictment and the arrest kind of gave people a little bit more comfort that they had more safety and support to step forward. And I think announcing that there were 50 people that were preparing to file suit kind of made people that were on the fence, that were still scared, to step forward. Now, anytime you have a situation like this, the real task is to make sure that every single person that you sign on to represent has a legitimate claim, and that's the difficulty, because one bad apple spoils the barrel, as they say. So you're kind of it's kind of a balancing test, really. On the one hand, you want to absolutely, we believe victims. If you've been victimized, please step forward. This is a safe space for you. We can help you. We will help you. On the other hand, we have to make sure that we fully vet the case, and we have to make sure that it's a legitimate case. So that's the process that we're going through now. Yesterday I announced that our team intended to start filing cases within 30 days. It may be sooner than that, but I was not expecting the high volume of contact that we've gotten in the last 24 hours.
I mean, the sheer number of lawsuits that you're talking about as of yesterday, 120, to me, I'm like, wow, that is a giant number. But now you're talking about over 1,000 people that came forward, just overwhelming as you're discussing that. But let's move on to another aspect of this. A lot of people are talking about names that could come
Mm.
up in these lawsuits. You referenced that some of these names are pretty high profile and could shock us. What can you tell me about those names? Are there a lot of people that could be implicated in future crimes? Is it possible that the things that will be listed in these future lawsuits could be prosecuted? What can you tell me?
Well, I'm very careful to talk about whether someone did or did not commit a crime. The civil system is very different than the criminal system. The criminal authorities are very particular about which claims that they pursue because the standard of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. In the civil system, the standard of proof is more likely than not, or preponderance of the evidence. So it's a lot lower standard in the civil system. So, but to answer your question as far as crimes, I won't comment on that. But as far as whether there will be additional individuals, people that we all know joined in some of these suits, there's no doubt that will be the case. There's no doubt that some of these events and these assaults occurred at particular people's homes, some venues, some hotels, some clubs. We know that there were people in the room when some of these things occurred. It's my view that if you participated in it, if you benefited from it, if you encouraged it, if you watched it go on and were somehow involved, whether it be even peripherally involved, and did not try to stop it, especially with regard to minors, then it's my view that you have liability on the civil side. So that's what we're looking at, and obviously we want to be very careful about who we name because I don't want an error in that respect is not good for anyone, and I'm not going to be the person that starts naming names of potential people and smearing people for no reason because the case is about credibility. So I have made sure that each of these people that we represent currently are people that I'm proud to represent and I believe in and I believe in their case. But I want to make sure that we make sure we include every potential liable party when we file the case.
These names that will be included, the ones that you are willing to include in these suits, why will they surprise us so much? Is it because they're beloved people in the Hollywood universe?
I've gotten this question so many times, and I know, and you're doing your job. Obviously, you want to know who they are, some kind of facts, so you can kind of figure out who they are. I think I'll just leave it at this. I mean, you know, it was a secret that everyone knew about what was going on with regard to these parties and some of the things that happened in these so-called after parties. There was a pattern in practice, custom of behavior that went on for many years. The MO of how it went down was pretty much the same for many years. It typically included, people identified and specifically invited to certain venues and parties. And when they showed up, they were given a specific drink. They were made to drink it. If they didn't drink it, they would many times be kicked out of the party. And a lot of these folks would drink this drink that was provided to them and literally could not remember hardly anything that happened thereafter. And the next morning woke up disheveled, injured, confused, scared, ashamed, full of guilt, and wondering what in heck happened to them. Some of them, of course, have clear memory about what happened, but could not stop it from happening. It's incredibly egregious, especially with regard to those that were minors at the time this happened. And it's my view that if you were around and you were there and you were watching this and in some way participating in this, you're complicit. It's one thing to obviously anybody that was directly participating in this, in my view, should be under the jail. But that's not my decision to make. That's the authorities. My job is to find and ferret out all the people involved, facilitated, benefited from, profited from, and make sure that they are parties in these cases as we file them. And there is a long list of people. I've said, and I'll say it again. I have no doubt that there are people right now who know that they were somehow involved in this, who are now scrubbing their social media, who are searching their memories, who are deleting their texts, probably deleting pictures, and trying to distance themselves from this. And we know who they are, or we will find out who they are. So, this is not something that's going to happen overnight, but I think we're at the tip of the iceberg here.
You brought up the disturbing pattern that we're hearing over and over again in the civil suits that have already been filed and the indictment that Diddy would allegedly drug these people, oftentimes against their will, and then sexually assault them. And then the word that we're hearing a lot is freak offs, when these incidents would oftentimes be recorded. Is this something that you've seen from your clients that potentially they have recordings?
The client, some of the clients have recordings. What the reason the press conference was held yesterday is obviously we can collect evidence from our own clients, and we can check their phones, and we can, some of this stuff happened years back, so that's some of that is hard to do. But what we really are interested in, not only victims coming forward, but people that witnessed these events coming forward. I have had so many people send me unsolicited information that they think might help. I was here, I saw this. Here's I can corroborate this, that kind of thing, and that's so important with a case like this. I don't know what the federal government has in its possession based on the raids of Sean Combs's homes. So I am doing what I can. Obviously, I've cast a very wide net, and I put the word out that, look, if you have evidence, please come forward. Please provide us what you have. It may be helpful, it may not. I've gotten a lot of videos and pictures, and it's hard to sort through that and figure out, okay, let me try to put this in context, and figure out how this might help a claim and how it might not. But what we've seen is, if you look at the indictment, the 3-count indictment against Sean Combs, it describes a pattern of activity that is very consistent with what we're hearing from people that are calling us.
You spoke of an eerie part of this pattern, even more disturbing than the rest of it, that minors are involved. And this is something you referenced in the press conference, someone as young as 9 years old. You also listed a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old. Obviously, all these people are underage, they're minors at the time. So are you surprised that in the indictment there weren't any charges to that effect?
I, I think that the government, obviously, typically when you deal with the government, they do not bring an indictment unless they can absolutely prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, that's anytime you deal with the feds, they're very thorough, but they will not put something in an indictment that they do not think they can slam dunk prove. So it's my suspicion, I haven't talked to them, but it's my suspicion that they certainly had information that suggested the very kind of thing I talked about yesterday, but maybe they don't have the evidence to put it in an indictment and to prove it. What I'm hoping is, and I'm encouraging my clients, to those that, to the extent that they are willing to do so, to make themselves available to the federal authorities, to tell their story, and I expect the indictment will grow. I expect there will be more counts. But again, that's not my bailiwick. My bailiwick is to pursue justice in the civil system on behalf of the clients that I've vetted, and I think their cases can win in court.
That's interesting that you said you think the indictment will grow. Maybe more charges could be filed against Diddy based on what we're going to hear in these more than 100 lawsuits. So let's talk about those allegations for a second. Again, we're just seeing this pattern over and over about sexual assault, false imprisonment, drugging. Can you tell me a bit more about the allegations that your clients are bringing?
I just talk generally about them. It's I kind of put them in two different buckets, if you will. The first bucket is individuals, young people trying to break into the entertainment industry, whether it be acting, singing, dancing, that sort of thing. People who are recruited by affiliates of Sean Combs or others in his group. Who one individual I'm thinking about in particular who went to a studio to audition and ended up being allegedly sexually assaulted. That's one bucket. The larger bucket is just people who are identified perhaps in a crowd, on the street, at a club, recruited to come to parties and get to the party and are drugged and then are assaulted. That's the second bucket. That's the larger bucket. And so it's kind of the MO is the same, but the group of people is a little bit different. You have some aspiring singers and aspiring dancers and actors, that group, and then you have people that just were flattered to be invited to a party by somebody of Sean Combs's stature and celebrity. So It's all of it's sad, all of it's egregious, but each case is different.
This next part is really just sad to even talk about. You mentioned that over 50%, half of these people who are filing suit actually had already reported this, whether it be to the police or to hospitals, maybe in the way of a rape kit or something like that following the sexual assault. So this had already been on record. How do you feel about that? Do you think that charges should have been filed when those things were reported?
I'm still delving into that. So the many of these folks who woke up the next morning scared, um, ashamed. Some cases they can't find their shoes. The only thing they remember is being forced to take a drink. End up at the hospital, drug tested, and find drugs in their system when they're not people that typically do drugs. And one in several cases where they found uh, what was described as a horse tranquilizer in their system. Um, you know, Obviously those people who went to the hospital and reported that, what happened after that, why it wasn't pursued, there's as many different reasons for that as there are different clients. So, I'm not casting aspersions at the authorities or casting aspersions at the hospital. It just is what it is. And you should know, and I think you probably do know, is that anytime someone is victimized in this way, it takes a heck of a lot of courage to come forward. The authorities know that these are incredibly hard cases to prove. I think we released yesterday some statistics about sexual abuse and assault and exploitation in the United States, about the small percentage of people that actually report it, and the much, much, much smaller percentage of cases that are ever actually taken, and then the much, much smaller percentage of prosecutions that ever actually occur. It's a nationwide pervasive issue, and if you don't report it immediately, it becomes that much harder to report because the first thing we're going to hear, and I think we've already heard from Mr. Combs's team, is that if something had happened, why didn't they report it immediately? That's kind of the knee jerk reaction of most people who don't understand the scenario here and how things actually work in the real world. Because it's hard to prove these cases, even if you reported it on the spot. It's hard to prove these cases. It makes it much harder, especially when you're worried about ramifications from your family, even from your job, from your community, and also you're dealing with a celebrity who's celebrated, and the word fanatic is the short for that is fan, and fans can be quite nasty. I've already gotten a lot of threats on social media just because I'm the lawyer representing these folks. There's a real fear there. And, I think the fact that the federal government took action, the fact that there was an arrest and an indictment, the fact that bail was denied, I think now three times, um, gives people some courage to step forward. And then when they see that other people are stepping forward, I think it's a good thing. And to have a dialogue and a discussion about the difficulty of these cases and how pervasive this kind of conduct is good for everybody. And so I'm glad that and proud these people stepping forward of their courage. And I'm going to do my best to pursue their claims in an aggressive fashion and make sure that obviously one of the defendants will be Sean Combs, but I think there'll be many more.
You use the word courage, and I really want to highlight that because you're right. This is such strength for these people to come forward at maybe the darkest moment of their life and reveal it to the world. But the strength there is really important to highlight. And I'm wondering, as things move forward, if federal prosecutors do reach out to any of your plaintiffs, do you think that they'd be willing to testify and tell their story in that way?
I'm certainly going to encourage them to do so. Absolutely going to encourage them to do so. That's of course another level of courage to do that. One of the things that each plaintiff has been told is that at some point your name will be revealed. When we file the case, obviously we're going to reveal your name to the people that we sue and the entities that we sue. We're going to file your case as John Doe or Jane Doe, but it's up to the court ultimately whether we will have to reveal your name publicly. And I've tried to make it clear that ultimately the court may say you must reveal your name. And so I've tried to make that clear on the front end. Now, That's even a step further when you talk about, are you going to be a witness in a federal prosecution? That's a big deal. You can't hide your name and your identity when you serve as a witness in a case, especially a case against somebody like Sean Combs. It's going to be very high profile, and in these cases, I think you probably, common sense tells you that the first defense is always going to be to attack the victim. That's the first defense. It's been that way since I've been handling these cases for 20 some odd years. And you got to make it clear on the front end that look, you're going to be put under a microscope. Everything you've done and said your entire life is going to be examined. Anything you've ever posted on the internet or social media is going to be examined. Every job you've ever had, every employer you've ever had, they're going to talk to them. They're going to do a deep, deep dive into your background, and be prepared for that. But ultimately, none of that has anything to do with what happened in the room at the time that individual was assaulted. So, you have to prepare people for that. And that's one of the reasons that people are very reluctant to come forward, laying aside the guilt and the shame and the self blame that people have, like, how did I put myself in this position? That sort of thing. When I was representing the women who were assaulted or allegedly assaulted by Deshaun Watson, the football player, you know, at the beginning, I encouraged them to speak to the NFL. And and the NFL investigators, former federal prosecutors, these were very professional, very sophisticated people who were leading the investigation on behalf of the NFL. One of the first questions they asked these women was, "What were you wearing?" Which it is just is indicative of what these folks face, which is, even the people who are supposedly trying to help you, who are trying to gather information, their first thought is somehow you're to blame for the conduct of someone else. And so it's very hard for the general public to understand that, because the general public typically is going to look, well, if something happened, you would have reported it. Well, if something happened, what was your role in this? Why did you take that drink? Instead of looking at it from the perspective of, I was sought out, I was flattered. I thought, wow, this is something I can tell my friends. I was invited to an after party with this celebrity and other celebrities. And the next thing I know, I wake up confused and injured, through no fault of my own, but it's the natural human tendency to want to blame yourself, and certainly the tendency of the general public to blame the victim.
This is a major update in the widespread allegations against P. Diddy. So obviously, we're going to continue to follow this one. But Tony, thank you so much for coming on today and giving us some insight into these future lawsuits.
Thank you very much.
Following news of these pending 120 civil lawsuits, Diddy's team released a new statement saying, quote, "As Mr. Combs' legal team has emphasized, he cannot address every meritless allegation in what has become a reckless media circus. That said, Mr. Combs emphatically and categorically denies as false and defamatory any claim that he sexually abused anyone, including minors." Diddy has pleaded not guilty to the federal charges, saying he plans to tell his side of the story when it comes time for trial. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.